The Camino Exposed. What's it all about? Why is it that some people get so much more out of walking a Camino than others do? Coming right up. So this week we are going to talk about the Camino Exposed. What do I mean by that? I suppose for those who've never walked a Camino, what I would really like to do is to share some thoughts with you about what it is, what it isn't, and why you might be suited to walking it or not, why you might be disappointed, really just to give you food for thought. And hopefully it will help you make the decision on whether you want to walk a Camino, which one you want to walk, and so on. Now, when we're talking about the Camino, let's get this into context. Most people, when they hear about the Camino, think of a particular route, and that is the Camino Francis, which traditionally doesn't start anywhere. It started at home, but more recently, people seem to think it starts in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, over the Pyrenees, across Spain to Santiago de Compostela. For Spanish, the main starting point is Roncesvalles, just on the Spanish side of the Pyrenees. But that Camino Francis tends to be the one that people think of as the Camino. The reality is, and I just Googled this because I didn't know the answer, how many Camino routes are there? Apparently 281. The reason being, of course, is that when people started walking the Camino as a pilgrimage, they would walk out their front door and set off. So there are Camino routes that start in Paris, in Germany, Hungary, all over Europe, and they all converge on Santiago de Compostela. But we kind of think of Camino Francis as being the Camino. Again, let me just preface my comments here with the fact that I've only walked 3 Caminos. I was reading about people yesterday who'd walked 30, I think, or more. So I'm a relative novice, and I have only walked the Camino Francis. Next year, I'm hoping to walk 4 different ones to try and improve on that. But so my thoughts that I'm sharing today are based on the Camino Francis, but I think more generally will apply to other Caminos as well. So let's get on with it. What is the Camino to different people? Look, for some, I think it's a great long hike. For other people, it's a great cheap holiday. Let's go on a walking holiday, stay in cheap accommodation, that type of thing. For some, it's a pilgrimage, a spiritual pilgrimage, a religious pilgrimage. So let's kind of talk about the differences for those for a moment, and what I believe is the true essence of the Camino, and what I think you can get out of it, the most you can get out of it. So let's think of it in terms of a long hike. You like hiking, let's go and hike the Camino, whichever route that is. If you're going purely for a hike, you might not enjoy it. I've read lots of reports of through hikers from the US, for example, who are very disappointed with the Camino. There's lots of people on the trail. Yeah, if you pick the Camino Francis, the Camino Portuguese, the Norte to a degree, some of those more popular routes, it's because it's gaining in popularity as well. There's a lot of people. It's not like walking down a high street, but my last walk on the Camino Francis, there was always other pilgrims within sight. In the last 200 Ks or so, certainly, from the last 200, there was always like a dozen people in sight, and the last 100, probably 50 at least in sight. So it's not remote in that sense on that particular route. You might not like it as a hiker. Why? You might not find it very challenging. A lot of the Camino Francis and some of the other routes are along the sides of roads. A lot of it is through, built-up areas, like towns, cities. So all that sort of hustle and bustle. So there's quite a bit of urban landscape that you're going through. I mean, it's balanced with some beautiful scenery and so on, but don't think this is just a country hike. Most of the routes, it's not. You're going through towns and villages and going to be bumping into lots of people. And it's kind of, what's that term that people use instead of camping? It's glamping, glamorized camping. Generally, people are not carrying camping gear. A few carry tents, not many, but you're staying in accommodation and things like that. So it's a little bit removed from hiking in a way. So if you're thinking of a Camino purely as a hiking holiday, you might enjoy it, you might not. If you've approached it that way, I'd love to get your feedback down below. I'd love to hear your comments. You know, these are just my views. So maybe hikers don't find it as fulfilling as they thought. What about those people who are thinking, oh, you know, it's a great cheap holiday? Yeah, you know, if you enjoy a walking holiday, you can stay in some very inexpensive accommodation. If you don't mind the sort of albergue, dormitory type accommodation, you know, that can be 10 or 12 euros a night. Particularly on the more populated Caminos, there's a lot of infrastructure for, you know, feeding pilgrims, so there's lots of, you know, cheap meals along the way and things like that, so that's pretty good. You're going to pass through some nice landscapes as well, of course, as those urban areas. You're going to go through some, again, particularly on the Camino Francis, some wonderful historical areas. I mean, like really historical. There's an ancient dig at Atapuerca where I forget the name of the, you know, how they name different humans from different eras, you know, sort of going way back where they've excavated sort of Stone Age sites, you know, wonderful cathedrals going back 1,000 years old and all that, you know, all of that's great. So if that's your thing, yeah, you know, you'll probably get quite a bit out of walking a Camino. And then there's the sort of pilgrimage aspect. And of course, you know, we're talking here about long hike, you know, a walking holiday, a pilgrimage, and there's all kinds of variations in between those. I'm just trying to simplify it. And then there's the pilgrimage aspect, which is the traditional reason that people walk a Camino. For 1,000 years or so, it's been a Christian pilgrimage. Prior to that, it was a pagan pilgrimage. And again, particularly on the Camino Francis and some of the more popular routes, you get a very strong sense of that. That, you know, this is very much a pilgrimage site. There's evidence, a pilgrimage route. There's evidence of it all over the place. You know, so how is that different if you approach a Camino from that perspective? That actually I want this to be a bit of a pilgrimage. The first thing I would say is the difference is for me at least, it's not about hiking at all. You know, and I've said this a few times on the channel. Do I go hiking at home? No. Do I go on hiking holidays in other places? Nope. Doesn't hold any interest for me, to be honest. So why does the Camino? Because, you know, I'm walking 40, 50, 60 days. I'm hiking. No, I'm not. I don't see it that way. I'm actually on a pilgrimage. So what's the difference? To me, the difference is when I'm walking on a Camino, the walking or the hiking is the vehicle by which I undertake the Camino. And let me explain that. The Camino to me is about getting away from everyday life, unplugging quite literally. For me, it's being on my own quite a bit with my thoughts. And a good way for me to do that I found is to be out in nature and walking. A lot of people describe a Camino as like a walking meditation. It is absolutely that for me. And that's probably one of the reasons why I like to walk predominantly alone. And I've gone into this before, you know, do you get lonely? Yep, that's all part of it. It's, you know, exposing yourself to that loneliness and kind of seeing what's happening, but you know, being unplugged and so on. That I find is the essence, the main appeal for me in a Camino. It's to be doing out of a totally different environment, yeah, away from everything day to day, not having to think about anything else, and just having that kind of walking meditation. And I'll come back to this in a moment and why I think that's so valuable. One thing I want to mention also is that I don't think it matters how far you walk. And again, I've got videos about this on the channel, you know, real pilgrims walk this distance and that distance. And, you know, if you only walk 100 kilometers because that's the minimum required to get your certificate, you know, you're kind of somehow a lesser pilgrim than others. To be honest, that's complete BS in my mind. It's kind of what's in here and what's in your heart that matters. And for me, the distance is almost irrelevant. It's the journey and it's the time on the trail. Having said that, if I walked less than 100 Ks, I don't think I'd get the benefit, because I'd do it I walk really slowly. I'd probably do 100 Ks. I'd drag it out. I might make it last 6 or 7 days, but that's not enough. 6 or 7 days on the trail I don't find is enough for me to get the real benefit of a Camino. That's the only bit for me where distance comes into it, and it's, like I say, it's not even distance, it's time on the trail. So that's why I like to walk longer ones. So to me, it's got really very little to do with the actual hiking. It's got not much to do with the actual distance. It's about the time on the trail. The other thing which I think differentiates, going on a hike or a walking holiday or a pilgrimage, is the mindset that you're going with. And you hear this repeated a lot on Camino forums and so on, that tourists go with expectations. Pilgrims go with gratitude. And you think about that for a minute. You read stuff online about people walking a Camino and, they got upset because of this meal, or they got upset because of this albergue, screwed up their booking, or something like that. To my mind, it's not worth getting upset about stuff like that. That's back in the world, if you like. That's back in your day-to-day, where you worry about things like that. This is an opportunity to just absolutely let go. Don't worry about stuff. Don't let things hassle you, to chill and so on. So, and I've talked about this on my planning videos, where, I plan and plan and plan my Caminos. But to me, it's just about understanding more about the particular route I'm walking, or the places that I'm going to be passing through. It gives me a rough idea of how long to allow to walk that particular Camino. Once I'm walking, it's freewheeling. I'm really not walking to a plan as such. So let me come back then to this whole thing about sort of expectation and what for me makes walking a Camino different to just walking or hiking and so on. And I think it could almost come down to one word, and that is openness. Being open and flexible to whatever is going to happen. And, I was talking with a friend yesterday over coffee, and he's going to be looking after my business while I'm away. And he said, how's your kind of plan, do you think it's going to be like your previous Caminos and all that kind of stuff? And I said, no, I hope it's not. I want it to be different, and that's why I'm walking a very different route this time. And I kind of expect I'm going to walk here and here in my first couple of days, but after that, who knows? Who knows where I'll stay? Who knows who I'll meet, what I'll see? And that, to me, is just a glorious aspect of walking a Camino. It's that unexpected, the unexpected that happens, good and bad, and it's happened to me so many times on Camino that something has happened that in normal day-to-day life might have irritated or upset me. And when I'm totally chilled out on the Camino, I go, okay, that didn't quite work out. What's that term that kids use these days? So that just happened. But never mind, we'll do something else, And 99.9% of the time, something better happens. And I use that to illustrate the fact that to my mind, you need to walk a Camino with that openness. And I always say you walk with an open mind and an open heart, and just kind of see what happens and who you meet and so on. So that brings me back almost to the beginning of why I think walking a Camino with a pilgrim's mindset is very different. It sets out very different expectations to someone who's going on a hike or a walking holiday or whatever. And that openness. What it means is that I'm far more open and accepting of everybody that I meet. And I have met amazing people on the Camino, and I think you'll find most people who've walked a Camino will say the same thing. You are meeting people that in everyday life you would never meet, for whatever reason. And you have these very fast sort of friendships and relationships building, because you're all on a similar journey, and you all have something in common. You're all literally heading to the same place on the same path, but for many different reasons. And so that bonding is really good. The cultural aspect, it amuses me to a degree, the speed at which some people walk a Camino. And I'm not here to say you should walk it, cycle it, do X kilometers a day. I just know how I enjoy walking a Camino, and it's going pretty slow and enjoying every aspect. I want it to last, as long as possible. And so I love, the culture along the way, whether that be food and people and, historic buildings or whatever. I go into almost every church I come to, every cathedral. So I love all of that. But in terms of sort of that expectation element and why we walk Caminos, I think there are a couple of things that are real standouts to me. One is that a lot of people walk a Camino, I think, in search of answers. And it's very often that they've gone through some sort of trauma, relationship trauma, health trauma, loss, and they're feeling a bit lost, and they're actually looking for something. That's what drew me to my first Camino, to be honest. I had been on the treadmill of working for probably 40 years, without stop. Perhaps it was burnout or whatever, but I just got to the point in my life and I thought, what the heck am I doing? And it was the movie The Way. It made me aware of the Camino and what potentially I might gain from it. And I just needed time out. So I was in search of something. I was in search of answers. My blog, if you've been on there, is called In Search of Santiago, because I was searching for the place, the saint, searching for anything that would give me answers. And a lot of people, I think, walk the Camino like that they're kind of in search of something. A lot of people, I think, are looking for hope. Maybe they're down for all kinds of reasons, and it kind of renews their faith in humanity, and they see the beauty of the world around them, and that buoys their spirit. And I think a lot of people are searching for or looking to renew faith, and that's where we come back to that sort of religious component again. So I think a lot of people are searching for or perhaps trying to renew faith. And let me say right here, I wouldn't call myself religious, definitely spiritual. I don't practice any religion day to day, but I love the sense and the energy of going into temples and cathedrals and so on, really, these buildings of any faith. And the thing that absolutely astounded me on the Camino Francis, which I'm not sure I will experience on the VDLP, is that sense of faith. And you just can't help it. If you have an ounce of spirituality or religion in you, you will find that enhanced, because you are walking past and going into churches, up to 1,000 years old. You are walking on old Roman roads of 2,000 years old. You're walking on the very path that pilgrims have walked on for 1,000 years. You're seeing wayside crosses along the way. It is just so powerful, I found. I'm not a person who goes to church or anything like that. I would go into churches every day and pray to God. I didn't attend Mass or anything. I'm not into formal religion in a way, and I don't really sort of understand it. I would sit on mountaintops and talk to God. This is kind of what it did to me. I'd love to know if you had similar experiences. And there were experiences that I went through which, to my mind, demonstrated very clearly to me that there was a higher power, walking with me on that journey. And I'll put a link down below to some of those stories if you want to have a look at them. So there's a danger here. I'm going to ramble, but the whole point of this video was to kind of say, look, if you're thinking of walking a Camino, there are different ways of looking at it. It's a great hike. it's a great cheap holiday. But it's also something particularly unique in my mind. And if you go with that in mind, with that sort of pilgrim mindset that, hey, this isn't just a hike, this isn't just a cheap holiday. If I walk with an open heart and an open mind, and so I'm going to learn things. Things are going to be revealed to me. I'm going to find out things about myself. I'm deep in thought 7 or 8 hours a day walking, Gee, you process a lot of stuff. And that's why I walk alone. I don't want to be walking with someone chit-chatting. I want that thinking time, that meditation time. And to me, that is the real essence and power of walking a Camino. Not much to do with hiking, to be honest. And I have a little note on my notes here that for me, it's an emotional and a spiritual journey above all else. It just happens to involve a bit of walking. That's really what I think a Camino is all about. So, sorry, I rambled. You may think this was all rubbish. I'd love to get your comments down below, whether you think in similar ways or what expectations you have of your first Camino. And I'll tell you what we're going to talk about next week. We're going to talk about God and the Camino. Now, don't run away. I've already said I'm not into formal religion. I found this in the house. The last time I read this was at school, over 50 years ago. So I'm not a Bible puncher. I'm not an evangelist. I'm not going to be, proselytizing. I'll share next week some thoughts about that religious, spiritual side of the Camino and what I've experienced and what I draw from it. So tune in next week for the Camino and God, with a soft G, small g. Okay, see you next week. Bye for now.